Welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'll be your host, and this podcast exists to help you improve your communication skills. Whether you communicate one-on-one, to a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we know that when we improve our communication skills as leaders, it exponentially changes everything. It improves our relationships, it improves our leadership skills, and it improves our business skills. So let's get ready to dive into this next episode. Well, promises aren't just words. They're commitments that have the potential to change lives and shape destinies. So, do you keep your promises? Wow, what a tough question. I'm thinking about all the times I've told my kids we would go do something and then it happened. And I'm thinking back through each of those scenarios and opportunities. I'm so excited today because we're going to dive deeper into this topic. It's really an honor for me because I love to interview fellow speakers who are especially just light years away from where I am right now. I've learned so much from this speaker, and he is someone who, I'll let him share more, but he's a Hall of Fame speaker. He's an award-winning Las Vegas entertainer. And we're going to talk with Jason Hewlett today about leadership promises. And so, Jason, thank you so much for being on the Speak with People podcast.
This is cool to be here with you. Thanks for the invite. I appreciate that we could know one another through one of my other friends, Josh Shipp. And that is a great episode for your listeners as well if they didn't hear it. 2 episodes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, Josh is an amazing communicator, and it was so fun. Funny, true enough story. Today in my podcast recording, right before this, I interviewed another Jason. So now I've got 2 Jasons in a row. While being a Jason, it's a lot of Jason today.
That's what I'm talking about. We found the right name, the right place, right time.
I love it. I love it. Well, hey, for our listeners, kind of dive a little bit into your story, what you do, where you're from, all that good kind of stuff.
Yeah, I grew up in a place called Park City, Utah, which is a ski town. It's where the Olympics were held in 2002. And I've lived in Utah most of my life, traveled all over the world and lived many places, including Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Philadelphia, Las Vegas, even Brazil. And so I started my career in Las Vegas essentially as a impersonator. I went and tried out for a show called Legends in Concert. And it was at a casino called the Imperial Palace right on the Strip, which is a very famous theater that is now, and casino that's now gone. Now it's the Link, but it's that big Ferris wheel. But back then, that was a big show. It was called Legends in Concert, and it was a place where impersonators, people that dress up, look, and sound like the artist they're doing, would go for the gig. And I really wanted to be in this show, so I tried out as Ricky Martin. And then I tried out as Elton John, and I got the part for both. And that's quite a jump to be able to do both and impersonate them to the point that people don't know it's the same guy. But yeah, I had a career start there. And let's see, that was 2001 was when the paycheck started to come in as a performer. And through the years, I changed the show quite a bit. I left Legends after a year of working there, put together a one-man show of music and comedy impressions that was kind of like if Weird Al sounded like the artist. And I would do that at the end of a convention for, after their awards ceremony, I would get up and perform when they needed somebody that was affordable, but that was G-rated, Las Vegas quality, but G-rated for the corporate market. And that was a great way to make a living for a while. And eventually I was told that I was teaching leadership principles within the entertainment piece, which I found interesting.
Wow.
Because that's where I had always wanted to go. I always wanted to be like a mix between Zig Ziglar and Sammy Davis Jr. and Jim Carrey, just kind of a wacky combo. Right. So eventually I started speaking and sharing within a motivational speech a bunch of musical comedy impressions mixed with storytelling, ideas for leaders. And it's been a great career. I've been so blessed to get to do something so unconventional and yet having almost lived multiple lifetimes of dreams of other people that have said, man, I wish I could have done that in my life. And I'm just grateful I had the right connections, the right people to help me get there. And so, that's where we're at. Now I make a living as a keynote speaker on the big stages all around the world. I've done all the schools, I've done education market associations, I've done fairs, weddings, bar
Wow.
mitzvahs, you name it, done it all. But now I make a living on those big stages with the big associations. Kind of an average audience would, I'd say, between 1,000 and 3,000 attendees, and that's a nice way to make a living now.
Wow. So how many engagements do you speak at a year?
And I used to answer that question, it would freak people out because I used to do 200 dates a year when I was starting out in my performing career.
Wow.
And I was just getting every gig I could, to survive, and then creating really a great show that I knew everybody would enjoy no matter where I showed up, whether it was in Las Vegas or Orlando or Tampa, specifically for you, and or other places like going across the sea to perform in France or to speak in Macau or somewhere in Australia. It was really interesting to figure out how that all worked out. But I actually now I think I probably only average about, I don't know, 45 to 60 a year. And I try to do one or two a month in terms of, at least one paid, and I always do one free.
Mm,
I feel that that's part of my give back to the blessing of getting to do this. So I always do, a lot of charity groups as well.
absolutely. Wow. So growing up where you did, just to dive back into your story for a second, are you a big skier? Like, can you grow up where you are and not ski or?
Yeah, man, I don't know how you grew up there and not ski, but I know people that have done that. In fact, Park City, Utah has this cool thing that they do for kids that go to school there and grow up there. You get out of school early so you can go skiing. And
Wow.
that was a really unique place to grow up. I didn't realize how special it was till I eventually moved to Salt Lake City area. And that's when people were like, "You grew up in Park City?" Like Park City was a ghost town when I was growing up in the 80s, and now it's the posh high life Sundance Film Festival, kind of where Hollywood plays in the mountains. So
Yep.
it's kind of they call it kind of the little brother to Aspen, Colorado, but I'll tell you, Park City's got its own fame, and it's a monster. It's cool. It's fun to be from there and ski. Yes, I always do. How about you? You ever skied?
One time, because I grew up in Michigan, and so we
Ah,
don't really have. I mean, we had like one little tiny ski hill there, but I was in seventh grade. I was going up to tow rope. I let go. I knocked down about 14 people. It was bad. It was a bad deal, and so I never came back to it. So
been there, done that, man. Yeah, falling off the tow rope. I've
I
even
love it.
fallen off the chairlift, not that high, but like the kind of thing you don't forget. So then you sit back a little bit further in the seat.
Absolutely. Well, selfishly, I'd love to geek out and dive into all things speaking because I'm trying to learn as much as I can. But this episode specifically, I want to dive into, I mean, one of your keynotes, which I just absolutely love. And I think about our listeners who are in leadership positions, who are trying to build leadership with their companies. And I mean, just this premise of our leadership promises. I love that. Where did that develop? What happened in your life where that kind of came into place? Because I love those origin stories about where someone kind of got there. Ooh, this is my niche. This is what I love to speak about.
I didn't really realize what the origin story of this was until the last few years because growing up, I had a wonderful family. My parents kept promises to me. I was also somebody who set a lot of goals. And so I would sit and write my goals out and then go and work and accomplish them. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that there's a difference between a goal and a promise. And if you set a goal and you miss it, you just set another one. Whereas if you make a promise and break it, that's a one and done. And
Right.
I found that there was such a gravity difference in the weight of the word of promise that it's actually scary to a lot of leaders to say, "Hey, I'm going to promise you that I'm going to do this," or "I promise that this is going to happen." And so then a lot of leaders, unfortunately, are not quite sure if they can make that type of promise, especially to their customers
Right.
and to their teams. And so I started working on this messaging in a couple of years back. It was probably 2016 when I went all in on the promise, changed my website. I mean, that was a big jump because everybody looked at it like The Promise? What are you talking about? Is this a Hallmark movie? you know, is this some romantic message you have? And I find that interesting too, because I guess it is sort of a romantic, idealistic way of living. And I frame it this way. I start my presentations by saying, have you ever been to a concert and the artist you went to see didn't play the song you came to hear?
Yeah.
That's a broken promise, even though the artist never made that promise to us. And yet we feel let down. We feel like it was a broken promise moment. And I give the example of I saw Billy Joel in concert years ago. He played 38 of his 39 top 40 hits and left the stage without playing the Piano Man. Yes, the Piano Man didn't play the piano. And to me,
Wow.
perfect example of a broken promise to an audience expecting to hear that song. I believe that every leader, artist, speaker, performer, we all have a signature move or a signature song, something within us that people expect to hear from us, and that is our promise to share it with the world. And
Wow.
if we don't, we're breaking the promise. Now,
Wow.
sometimes people may not know what it is, and then when we deliver it, they want it again and again and again. And so, with the unspoken promises, such as a performer taking the stage and not playing their hit song, those are promises that are assumed. But then there are promises that are proclaimed, promises that we state. And so I like to say that a goal is great, and it's great to set goals, but goals are particulars and promises are proclamations.
Wow.
So, what do you proclaim you're going to do no matter what? A goal, you if you set it and miss it, that's just what it is. And then we talk about all the missed goals from last year and we set new ones. That's fine. But a promise is a
Wow.
non-negotiable. Promise is a sacred goal. A promise is something you become, and it's something you're not going to allow to not happen. And so, as I speak about that to a corporate audience, it's intimidating, but it's also exciting because it's aspirational.
Right.
So that's where that
Right.
came from.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I took myself inside of a corporate audience listening to that because uh, and maybe this is just my own opinion. 2024. I mean, we just talk. We say things all the time, and and the reality is do our promises actually, do we live them out like you just talked about? Because there's just, well, I said I was going to do that, but I didn't know these circumstances or those kind of things. But imagine how your leadership influence would change if you live that out. I mean, that is so powerful. What do you think are some of the biggest roadblocks for leaders when they think about making promises, their leadership promises? What are the things that get in their way the most from fulfilling them?
A majority of the time, from what I understand, a leader may not exactly be able to trust that if they make a promise, it can be fulfilled, not on their own volition, but perhaps due to the way the team functions, or maybe the product that they're delivering. They can't promise that it's going to show up undamaged, because even if the shipping and the manufacturing is awesome, well, what happens if they promise that it'll always be perfect and it's not? I mean, so there's a lot of play within that. So that's where what you speak about, which I appreciate so much in communication, is that we need our promise may very well be to just simply over communicate all
Mm.
that needs to truly happen. So in that sense, we can say, uh, we promise that no matter how your product arrives, we will make sure to make it perfect for when it for if any problem happens. And those types of things are important, and allowing us to know that something's not working out, and then we can say our promise is to fix it. So over communication is important. I mean, even
Absolutely.
recently we've seen a really big problem with the Francis Scott Key Bridge that was hit by a
Ooh.
vessel, by a barge. uh, you could say, yeah, the promise is that this bridge is always going to stand, but what happens when something collides with it. Well, now the promise is to over communicate. Here's the plan. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's what we're going to do, rebuild. Here's how we're going to apologize. So that then becomes your promise, is to over communicate and to own up to the challenges that you might be facing as a leader.
Wow. Wow. Boy, and that's I mean, so rare. I was just reading a book. Charles Duhigg just put out a new book called Super Communicators, and he talked about vulnerability and people lean in for vulnerability. I mean, to be able to get to that level of vulnerability and transparency in your leadership where you're able to communicate just how you did. I take responsibility for this. We didn't, we, for whatever reason we didn't. I mean, that's just it seems more rare in 2024 because it seems like most of what we see around us is people blaming other people or other circumstances or situations. But it seems more rare when it's like, nope, that was on me. I take responsibility. Do you find that to be true, or do you think I'm
Absolutely,
on the right
man.
path
That's the right way to say it, for sure. Taking responsibility. And even in many cases, when absolutely it's not your fault, but because you're the leader, you're willing to, own up to that sort of thing that happened within your team, within your product challenge, whatever it might be. You can always stand up and say, we take ownership of this. We're sorry it happened. Let's do all that we can to fix it and not allow it to happen in the future. That's a big deal, and that's not happening as much as you would like it to happen. Where the word is as good as your bond, the handshake, that whole thing. I mean, there's so many challenges with litigation and people going to court because of something. I mean, I got hit the other day. That this was really embarrassing, actually. I thought I had been paying for a copyright free service for images that I use on my blog and on my website. And I got hit by uh, a copyright claim. And I know I pay for this service that allows me to use these images. But
right?
then I went back through the fine print and I realized, oh, I think that maybe there's a loophole here, and these copyright claim, maybe they're a little bit of an extortionist situation. I don't know what's going on, but I said, okay. I responded to them and I said, hey, look, I thought that I had this license. I thought that I had this covered. Now that you're telling me this, I'm looking into it. I've removed all the images from the site. I'm taking ownership of it. What would you like me to do? Here's my license. Here's my situation, and I didn't realize, and I apologize. They went back and forth trying to get some money out of me and trying to tell me that I was in the wrong. And maybe I was, to some degree, right? Not having read all the fine print, but eventually, because I owned up to it and apologized and said, hey, I promise not to use those images anymore. And I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. And we've taken them down, and thought I had licensing. Guess I didn't, to the extent that I thought I could. And I had imaging licensing for social media, not for blogs and websites. And so they left me alone. I found that interesting, that was my way of keeping a promise, to say, yeah, I'll own up to it if it's a real problem, and I'll pay what you need me to pay, because I appreciate image licensing and copyright. And I don't want to
Right.
be on the wrong side of that. I think they were so surprised by that reply that they left me alone.
Right. But see, that's a level of integrity that they maybe weren't ready for. They weren't ready
No,
for. Yeah.
that's right.
And especially integrity. I mean, again, that's another, difficult word, because, I mean, integrity is, a foundation of leadership, and we need leaders who are, men and women of integrity. Especially in your book, you talk about, integrity being, this buzzword, but, a person of integrity, they've got to really assess their own values and, be able to live them out. Talk to us a little bit about, the role of integrity, in our leadership promises.
Well, integrity comes down to the person themselves, right? And it
Mm.
can then should be infiltrating into our leadership in the business. And so if we as a person can live with integrity, and we know that we're keeping promises that we've made to ourselves, then that will certainly be manifest just by the way that we communicate, by the way that we treat others, by the way that they see us showing up or not. And I love that idea of what is your integrity and what are your values? What do you espouse that is truly who you are? I mean, we very well could look at it from the framework of, if you've ever been to a funeral, people literally are just talking about the character and integrity of that person. Obviously, memories and stories, but like, what was that person made of? And so, if we look back on our lives with the decision we have to make today, and we can say, what would somebody say about me at my funeral in this situation? I think that's an interesting question. And that's a big
Oof.
promise to say I can live with that sort of foresight in, in living a life of true integrity. And so that's why I wrote The Promise to the One. And The Promise to the One is the first of what I'm hopeful is a series of books that will be along the lines of many different types of promises that we make in business or in life and with our families and with our teams, etc. But Promise to the one is yourself.
Right.
And if you can make and keep promises for you, whereas it pretty much is easy with your customers. It really is.
Right.
I mean, if you think about the brand promise of a logo, I mean, if I see Starbucks, I pretty much can believe that I pull in there, I'm going to get the drink I want, or I'm going to have free Wi-Fi in the lobby. Like, that's their brand promise, or Chick-fil-A, Chick-fil-A, if I pull up there on a Sunday, they're not going to be open because that's part of their brand promise.
Right.
And if I say, hey, thank you very much, they're not going to say, no problem. They don't say that. They say, my pleasure. That's part of their
Right.
branding promise, right? And so it's the same type of thing within our companies as well as within our own personal leadership, how we show up. What is our promise to us? So we can make promises to our customers, make promises to our teams, families, but then what about ourselves? The promise to ourselves is usually the one that we drop the ball on the most. But when we make promises and keep them to ourselves, then that's where confidence as a leader grows. And whether you're in a leadership position with a title or not, you are a leader.
Yeah.
Just like you are a performer, whether you believe it or not. We're based upon performance. We all have our performance that people want to know and see and celebrate us for. And that's why I like to share these musical artists within a keynote speech, because I say the performer's promise is to still perform even if nobody's enjoying it and to share their signature moves.
Yes.
And that's really where I came from in Las Vegas was, Jason, I was performing on stage for people that were sound asleep in the audience.
Wow.
And that was a great place to start my career and efforts to realize it doesn't matter if they're asleep or if they're bored or if there's 8 people in a 1,000-seat theater. I'm going to give them their money's worth because this is my great blessing and gift to get to share it with the world. And if I don't give 100%, then I'm breaking a promise to the audience, but I'm also breaking that promise to myself, and that's integrity.
Wow. 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 That's just, oh, that's so huge. I mean, it seems like it takes, a pretty good self-awareness to get to that place and to have that kind of authenticity. How important is authenticity when it comes to, keeping your promises, staying true to those leadership promises?
Well, authenticity is the foundation of who we are, and it's actually difficult to share it. I think it's even hard to find our own voice. And as somebody who does impressions or impersonations, it's always been kind of a conundrum to some people. They're like, he's teaching us how to be authentically who we are while doing a different voice. I, 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 I kind of enjoy the conundrum within that. But here's the other thing. Wouldn't you want to be taught by somebody who can clarify what the unbelievable voices and talents of others are in order to help you discover yours? And because I make a living as a speaker, I also make a life as a listener.
Wow.
And so I am a very good listener. I'm happy to listen to a lot, and that's part of my authentic journey, discovering not just that I can do voices of others and teach others how to find their voice, but also how I'm finding my own. And that's been a really cool journey for me as well. And sharing that authenticity, that can be scary because some people might not want to see our authenticity. They
Wow.
might,
Yeah.
I hear leaders all the time that are like, be your authentic self, but don't really, I mean, it's like, well, which one do you want? So yeah, we're not only teaching how to make and keep promises, but how to help leaders to understand that yes, we want the great talents and gifts that our people bring. And the more we can figure out what that is and help them to what I call identify, clarify, and magnify that.
Right.
And when their signature moves show up, that's when their authenticity comes through and it drives so much more business. It drives more joy in the workplace. The culture is better. The engagement is more purposeful. And the ROI is extremely different.
Wow. Wow. Absolutely. Walk us through that, because in the book you talk about this 3-step method. These words: identify, clarify, magnify. Walk us through how they can help you kind of get to that place.
So years ago, I was teaching this concept of everyone has a signature move, and I used to base it around one of my favorite performers as a kid that I practiced a lot of hours trying to figure out one dance move in the 80s. His name is Michael Jackson, and he did the moonwalk. And I used to say, what if Michael Jackson didn't do his moonwalk? That would be a broken promise to you if you saw him in concert back in the 80s or 90s. And so obviously Michael Jackson's had his story and it's been interesting. So I've sort of had to retire that from the stage piece. But I like the example because it's such an interesting thing to think about for yourself. If you're a leader, what is your signature move? What are you known for? How would I impersonate you?
Wow.
What is it that makes you stand out in a sit down world? And I used to stand on stage and say to people as I would perform as Michael Jackson or Elton John or Billy Joel and do these musical pieces, I would say, that's their signature move. Now, what's yours?
Wow.
And
Right.
Jason, unfortunately, that question sort of filleted open the brain of the person without me surgically putting it back together because I didn't give them a formula as to how to figure it out if they didn't
Hmm.
know.
Right.
And I was just kind of like, psychologically freaking them out to think, I don't know what my signature move is. And then I'd be like, and good night. so, so I met up with a friend of mine. His name is Steven Shapiro, and he's one of the great authors, speakers, and he lives in Orlando. Steven and I met up and we started talking about, how I could come up with a formula or a process that would help people to understand their signature moves. And because he's got a different type of brain than me, he said, hey, I need a process. And we came up with the ICM process, which I love to talk about. You can see me shifting in my chair. I love this so much. Signature moves, how to discover them. ICM process is simply identify, clarify, magnify. So it may sound simple, but it's profound. When we've taught leaders this, we like to say, so identify for yourself. And I just have them pull out a piece of paper and I say, I want you, instead of to identify your one signature move, I want you to try to identify as many gifts, talents, skills, attributes, even aspirations that you feel you have.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
just write down unedited all of the talents and gifts you have. And it's interesting, Jason, because a lot of these leaders have mostly only focused either on the shortcomings of themselves or of the people they work with. And when we tell them to just write what they're good at or what they want to be known for or what they're aspiring to be, it's a hard process. And so
Wow.
identify as a discovery process. And I actually challenge them to write down 100 words.
Wow.
100 words is tough. I mean, most people can't even do 20. And so then, and here's the funny part. If I would have said, hey, write down 10 things you can do to improve, they're like, oh, I got 20. But
Right.
write down 10 things you're great at. And they're like, I can't write 3.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so this is a fun process to take them through. And I actually do this as a workshop for the different companies that bring me in, either as a keynoter where I share the promised message and then we do the signature moves workshop, or when I'm consulting businesses and other leaders that are trying to get, just finding their footing and becoming better as leaders. So Then I take them through step 2, which is clarify. After they've done identifying, they've come up with their 100. And that's a really interesting process because I say, now pick your top 10. We're going to set that aside. And then we're going to come to the clarify section, which is clarify is the refining process. And you're going to ask the people that you work with to clarify for you what your talents are. And you're just going to reach out in either a text or an email or on social media and just say, I'm doing a workshop. I'm curious, what are 3 to 5 words that make me who I am?
Wow.
And it's really fascinating what happens. People start getting words they've never experienced for themselves or thought of for themselves, although they're all true. And it's what everyone else clarifies for them that they have yet to identify for themselves. And that's really special because then they come up with a clarify list of their top 10. So now you have an identify list you've come up with yourself. You have a clarify list from others. Now you can magnify this by putting those together and focusing on the different traits that you really resonate with. So, for example, if I did mine has, say, entertainer at the top or artist. And then I just say, I'm going to focus on that this week. And I'm going to see how entertaining I can be in every action with every person. It's fascinating, Jason, what happens if you get on a team call and you're thinking to yourself, okay, I'm going to share this one trait of the signature moves that I feel make up who I am. Now on a team call, you're more entertaining or you're more interesting. You're more interested. Wow. Another one is my wife gave me the word thoughtful. She clarified for me that I'm thoughtful, which I find ironic because I didn't even think of it in the identify side. So she says I'm thoughtful. So then if I focus on that trait on my team calls or with my next client, my next customer call, thoughtfulness now becomes the driver within the conversation. So then my thinking, my listening, everything goes through that lens. And it allows me to magnify my signature moves that then they fall in love with me even more because of it. And that's how I think leaders truly can transform their leadership is by not only doing that for themselves, but teaching that same process to the people they lead. It's a really cool thing. I love it.
Wow. Wow. That is powerful. Cause I talk with leaders all the time who are like, well, I don't, there's really nothing significant about me. I don't really have a, thing. Or I'll speak in an event and somebody will come up and say, oh, I don't have stories like you do. And yeah, you do. Like you just haven't exercised that muscle yet to be able to, utilize them. Oh, that is so incredibly powerful and helpful. Just out of some curiosity with all of the entertainment side with what you've done, have you ever, I found so much of my speaking, I love laughter. I tell lots of stories just about personal stories that have some tragedy in it so we can kind of laugh at it and so people laugh. But, you kind of get that label of like, okay, make me laugh. Have you ever had to deal with that over the years of like, well, all right, Jason's here. He's going to make us laugh, and they kind of put you like, perform now here, buddy. I'm always just curious to ask people who would understand that rule, what they think about that.
Dance, monkey.
Yeah,
make
exactly.
It laugh, clown. Do exactly. A joke.
Yeah, put this clown suit on. And I'm like, no.
Yeah, do a handstand. Yeah, well, trust me, that's been an interesting blessing and curse.
Right,
and,
right.
Eventually, you have to just see it as both, and that's okay because you can say to yourself, well, I don't want to make anyone laugh today, and that's kind of tricky because now you're breaking a promise to what they expect.
Right.
But then what about your own promise to your own sanity and your own self?
Right.
So I've had to find an even balance for myself. And one of my dear heroes, Robin Williams, who passed away, I think that because the expectation was that he was always at an 11, on a scale of 1 to 10 of energy, he was at 11.
Yep.
I think that eventually took him over the edge to an extent, and I feel horrible about it because I can resonate with the challenge of that expectation of others for us. In fact, I had somebody come up to me the other day and he goes, you're really not like you used to be. And I said, I know I've dialed it back a bit, haven't I? And he didn't like that answer, but I'm now like kind of in that 3 to 5 range for my normal conversation. Obviously, on stage, I can turn the light up to a 10,
Yeah.
but I'm going to be like in that 3 to 5 range because that's where I'm comfortable. If I'm down at 1 and I'm not making anyone laugh ever, then I'm bummed about that. But if I'm in that 3 to 5 range, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm doing this in a balance. It's not like I'm running around with a clown outfit on all the time, and I like that version. But then some people expect you to be at a level 10 because that's where they saw you on stage.
Right.
So yeah, there's an interesting balance with all of that. And the biggest struggle I've had from being entertainer guy who started his career in Vegas to this long spectrum into being a keynote speaker, and my people might think, well, that's kind of the same thing. It's not at all. I mean, I was doing the 9 p.m. show as an entertainer
Wow.
versus the 9 a.m. keynote leadership slot. Like that's a big jump.
Yeah.
It's a change in fee. It's a change in what people expect. I mean, I can't stand up on that stage at 9 a.m. and be doing Led Zeppelin and Metallica. They'll freak out. Their hair will blow back. The
Right.
coffee hasn't kicked in yet. So I have to be very gradual in my uh, giving them the amount of entertainment that they need. But the biggest challenge I've had is that I'm labeled an entertainer who has a message,
Right.
where in reality, I'm a Hall of Fame keynote speaker who uses entertainment to deliver the message.
Wow.
And a lot of people
Wow.
have a hard time seeing that there could be actual content coming from an entertaining place. And so that's where the ICM process, writing a book, some of these things as a coach that I've done and helped launch careers of other speakers that are now Hall of Famers and other things has been helpful.
Wow. Wow. Hey, before we end the conversation, I want to ask you some rapid fire questions in a second, but I mean, there's just, we could do like part, B, C, and D to this because there's just so many fascinating things I'd love to ask, but where's one of your favorite places you've performed or spoke around the world?
I love that question. And candidly, it wasn't because of the place, but it was because of the reason. I was called by the US military in 2014 to
Wow.
perform for the troops in Afghanistan during the middle of the war. And
Wow.
so went out there for almost a month, donated our time. I went with one of my heroes. His name is Dan Clark, one of the greatest speakers in the world. And he put this tour together, included me and a couple other great performers. And we got to perform for the troops for almost a month and traveled all around Afghanistan as we were being shot at in helicopters, and they kept their promise and protected us. It was amazing. And went
Wow.
to Kuwait, performed at every base there, Djibouti, Bahrain, when all around Ethiopia. I mean, it was crazy. It was awesome. So when people ask me that question, the greatest honor of my career and the best place I've ever performed was for the U.S. troops. God bless America, keeping us safe, and that's for me the best place ever.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Well, we do have a good amount of speakers who are listening, watching this. Who's one of your favorites? Like every time you listen to them, you just they fill up your bucket, they challenge you, and then you recommend them to other people.
Well, I have two that I would love to highlight. One has just passed away recently. Her name is Jeannie Robertson. And Jeannie was the greatest humorist, I believe, that ever lived, maybe only second to Mark Twain or something. But
Wow.
Jeannie, you ought to look her up if you're not familiar with her work. She went from keynote speaker for years that was doing the circuit to then becoming a household name essentially through her viral videos when she hit her 70s. And so she challenged me probably more than anyone I've ever seen on stage because she was always doing something new, always writing. In fact, when she passed away, they found her in her bed, surrounded by her journals as she was writing new material.
Oh,
And I mean, it's a fascinating woman, one of the great examples of all time of the best speaker you'll ever hear. And so hopefully your listeners will check her out if they don't know her yet. And the other one is a friend of mine named Mark Sharon Brock. That's a tough name to spell, but it's SCHARENBROCH. And his website is nicebike.com because I'm sure marksharonbrock.com was hard to type in. But Mark is probably the greatest living speaker in terms of humorist, somebody who did the education market first for a long time, and students went bonkers over him. He's the top speaker rating in terms of the National Speakers Association that they've ever had. and
Wow.
he's the greatest among us in terms of hilarious, touching, a powerful message. He just hits on all cylinders. So Mark Scherenbrock's the one that I refer as much as I can.
Wow. Wow. Is there a podcast that you love either on the guilty pleasure side or the leadership development side that you just keep going back to because it just fills you up?
So I was on a big kick of podcasts for a while, and now I'm just on a lot of them. So, and I love it. I love that you're doing this too. And I've started a few myself, but the one that I always come back to is called The Art of Manliness. And that one challenges me just because they talk about stuff I can't even do, like how to change the oil in your car and then run up a mountain. I mean, it's a very manliness thing that I'm not. And so it's fun to listen to.
Yes, yes. And is there a book? Is there a book that you would recommend to leaders to say, hey, if you don't read anything else, you've got to read this book?
Oh man, I'm looking at it right now. It's on my shelf. I just read it again on a cruise last week. It's called Lincoln on Leadership
Yes.
by Donald Phillips. Lincoln on Leadership. It's all this like backstories of Abe Lincoln that most people don't know regarding his leadership style. To me, it's one of the secret playbooks for leaders I've ever found.
Wow. Definitely. There's there's a new show right now on Apple TV about Lincoln's assassination, and it is so good.
Manhunt, right?
Yes, Manhunt. Yeah, and I just to focus on Lincoln's Secretary of War and Edward Stanton and just all those relationships is just it's so fascinating. I love it.
Yeah, I have it queued up. I can't wait to start it. But I watched Napoleon last night, and it was
I've not watched that one yet.
It was pretty interesting too when it comes to leadership. As you think about your leadership and thinking about some guy that's running around trying to conquer different countries.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how hard it is to just run your business of 10 people or 20 people. It's fascinating to watch something like that and from that lens.
And in a day where to communicate with other people on the other side of the country, they had to send a letter that was handwritten over horseback.
Yeah, I know. It's unreal to think of what happened from the 1700s to today.
Absolutely.
It was not the best movie in terms of like enjoyable, but it was obviously beautiful from the way it was shot. And then the story, I didn't know much about Napoleon other than what I'd heard. And this made me start researching him a bit more.
It's just awesome. Well, Jason, thank you so much for this today. It's just been absolute gold and such an encouragement, challenge to leaders. Where can we send people to find out more about you online?
My website is jasonhewlett.com. It's spelled like Hewlett Packard, Hewlett, and no relation, but jasonhewlett.com or on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time there, so it'd be great to connect with anybody. And if you want to check out my book, it's on Audible on Amazon, The Promise to the One. It's me narrating it. And I even do a few impressions like, Christmas time is more, like that kind of stuff. And it's a fun performance. So hope you'll check it out.
Awesome. Well, I absolutely love it. Jason, seriously, thank you so much for your time today and just appreciate how willing and open you are to just open the vault of your wisdom and share it with our listeners. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your good work. You're keeping the promise.
Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Speak with People podcast. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you were inspired and challenged to improve your communication skills. I want to thank you again for being a part of the Speak with People podcast community. Make sure you don't miss out on being a part of the Speak with People Facebook community group. Just head to Facebook, type in Speak with People, scroll down and join our community because every single day we're encouraging each other, we're helping each other to improve our communication skills. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next episode.